welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm gonna show you how I built this beautiful vanity. This was one of my favorite DIY projects. Before I installed my DIY vanity, there was a very boring and cheap looking pedestal sink here. There was no storage space. I used a simple top mount matte gray sink and I gave it a built-in look. I decided to make it look sort of embedded into the countertop. For the main countertop part, I used very inexpensive pine board. After I stained and clear coated it with a matte polyurethane finish, it ended up looking pretty much the same as the poplar. For the legs, I used 1x4 poplar boards and I wrapped them around. After attaching them together and sanding and finishing them, they ended up looking like much thicker, chunkier, solid legs. The vanity is extremely solid. I made the sink look like it's built in or even embedded in this solid piece of wood, but in fact, it is hollow inside and it's just 1x4 boards wrapping around and sitting on top of my 2x10 pine board. The sink is pretty heavy, a top mount sink which I installed over the pine countertop. This is a built-in vanity, so I got the baseboards here. I also did the plumbing myself. Everything I used is also linked down below, including the sink that I purchased online.
This shelf provides enough storage space for whatever is needed in a powder room. I decided not to use a solid surface for the shelf and leave these gaps for light to travel through and help make a small space feel more open, which is also why I left space between the shelf and the floor. This is actually what the vanity looks like 3 years after I installed it in my powder room where my 4 kids splash water around. The protective finish looks the same it did years ago thanks to 7 coats of oil-based poly on the wood. As a first step, to help me decide on dimensions, I drew an outline of the future vanity on the wall. Let's get to work! After switching the shut-off valves to the off position, I unscrewed the cold and hot water lines connecting to the existing faucet. This is a comprehensive how-to guide on building a bathroom vanity from scratch, removing a pedestal sink and installing the new vanity sink combo, including simple DIY plumbing. I admit this is more than a one-weekend project, and I further admit narrating this video was even more challenging than transforming a bunch of inexpensive boards into a beautiful custom bathroom vanity, because in this video I had to use the words slat, slit, and slot a lot. And I had a hard time distinguishing these 3 words from a 4th word that sounds to me exactly like all 3 of the other words, but is not nearly related to woodworking. After cutting the caulking between the sink and the wall, I loosened and removed the sink first and the pedestal leg followed. The next step was to cut some wood. It all started with a bunch of inexpensive bare wood boards. I went with poplar and knotty pine because this was during COVID times when wood was the price of gold, and poplar and pine were still more or less affordable. For the countertop and main support for the sink, I used a 2x8-inch knotty pine board, which I cut into 2 30-inch long boards in order to attach them together side by side to make a 2x16x30-inch countertop surface. 2 8-inch wide boards attached together to make a 16-inch wide surface is a cost-saving alternative to one board that's 16 inches wide.
So these are going to be the legs of the vanity. These are poplar boards. They are only 3/4 of an inch thick. I'm going to rip one of them to thicken the other 2. The look will be about 2.5 inches thick. The width of each leg is about 4 3/4 inch.
I'm using knotty pine for the part of the legs that's in the back and out of sight, just because this is a less costly alternative. Another item I'm saving money on is this high-tech dust collection system using a secret plastic jar, which actually works better than the original dust collection port that came with the saw, not to mention the fact that I kind of broke it. The back legs of the vanity would not be visible in the powder room, so I used cheaper knotty pine for the back and other sections which were supporting the weight of the vanity without adding to the look of the poplar boards, which are free of wood knots. I also found some scrap plywood I had from previous projects to use in place of the more pricey poplar for hidden structural sections of the vanity. I finished cutting all 4 legs. The sink is 16.5 inches deep, planning to make the vanity as flush to the sink as possible in the front. I'm aiming for 16.5 inches deep, the same as the sink. I cut a 3/4 inch thick pine board into 2¼ by 13-inch boards to make the slats for the shelf. I cut 2 boards for each L-shaped leg. The front of the vanity legs are 4.5 inches wide and the side is 2 5/8 of an inch. So the wider board here is 3/4 inch thick and 4.5 inches wide, and the narrower board is 3/4 inch thick and almost 2 inches wide. When placed together into one L-shaped leg, the side width becomes 2 5/8 wide. Since I wanted both of these boards to be exactly the same length, I cut them together to length on my miter saw. Now that there has been some progress on the cutting of the wood, I put everything together with clamps first to make sure I have all the right pieces and dimensions before assembling the vanity. This also gave me the idea that one shelf would work better than 2, and this helped me determine the best height for the shelf, so I altered my vanity diagram to be in line with the new plan. As mentioned earlier, I used poplar boards in visible areas and inexpensive knotted pine and some scrap plywood for hidden areas in the back of the vanity. After seeing the main structure of the vanity physically there in the powder room, it was easier to figure out how to design the shelf to ensure it is sturdy and neat looking. At this point, I finalized my decision on the height of the shelf where it would not be in the way of the P-trap.
So for the vanity legs, I'm attaching 3/4 thick material in an L shape. I'm using hidden pocket holes and screws and wood glue. I'm using cheaper pine for the side that won't be exposed, it will be against the wall. Just using a very inexpensive pocket hole jig to set the depth of the material here. My material is 3/4. That's where I put the little stopper, and then I attach it to my piece of wood. It is important to have special pocket hole screws. I also put the stopper, skirt stop, on the drill to 3/4, so you can see the 3/4 inch mark right there.
I clamped the pocket hole jig as close as possible to the end of the narrower board, which will be butting into the side of the wider board, making up each L-shaped leg. The specialized pocket hole drill bit has a skirt stop which I set to the 3/4 inch mark so that the drill stops at the depth required for a material of 3/4 inch thickness.
This leg is gonna be against the wall. The wall is gonna be on this side. That way the holes will be completely invisible because they will be on the wall side.
To assemble each leg, I applied a generous amount of wood glue to the edge of the narrower board, butted it against the side of the wider board, using a block on the ends to align the two boards, and the pocket square to ensure a right angle between the two boards, and screwed 4 pocket hole screws designed for 3/4 inch thick soft woods through the pocket holes of the narrower board and into the wider board, making up each L-shaped leg. I repeated the process for the remaining 3 legs. The next step was to assemble the front apron, but first I dry fitted the legs, front apron, countertop, and sink using clamps to help me decide on the best arrangement of the front apron, which is the board directly underneath the countertop connecting the front 2 legs. I used the wide board as the front apron to give the drain pipes a little privacy and to balance out the thickness of the chunky sink on top.
The next step is to screw this piece to these 2 and then move on to the side pieces.
I drilled 2 pocket holes in each end in the back of the apron board and connected it to the front pair of legs using wood glue and pocket hole screws. I clamped the leg to the table to help keep the assembled pieces in place, and I clamped the leg to the apron to keep the boards butted at right angles while screwing them to each other. I also added a few 1-inch wood screws in the back of the apron through pre-drilled holes. These screws were sunken into the wider board of the L shape, while the pocket hole screws were sunken into the narrower board of the L-shaped legs. And the front of the vanity is almost done. I repeated this process for the back of the vanity. The next step is to assemble the back apron. I used some scrap high-density particle board from a previous project as the back apron, since this section would not be visible in the end. Similarly to the front apron, I drilled 2 pocket holes in each end of the back apron. I used wood glue and 2.5-inch Kreg pocket hole screws to attach this section to the back legs of the vanity, while ensuring this board was perfectly perpendicular to each of the 2 back legs with the help of a pocket square. To attach the long apron section to the wider board of each L-shaped leg, I added 5 1.25-inch funnel head screws into the 3/4-inch thick apron section, and the 2 pocket hole screws were attaching this apron section to the narrower board of each L-shaped leg. The back of the vanity is now almost done. I repeated this process for each of the 2 side aprons. The next step was to connect the front of the vanity to the back. I've got 2 side aprons or structural boards which will connect the front pair of legs to the back pair of legs, in addition to providing structural support for the heavy vanity top. I'm using a nice looking poplar board on the side exposed to view and a scrap material board on the wall side where it won't be visible. The front skirt board will connect the front pair of legs and the back skirt board will connect the back pair of legs. The next step was to work on the front of the vanity. I drilled 2 pocket holes in each end of the back of the cross board or front structural board, which would be supporting the shelf slats. I then attached this bottom board to the front pair of legs using wood glue, 2 pocket hole screws attaching the crossboard to the narrower section of each L-shaped leg, and a few funnel screws going into the wide section of each L-shaped leg. I pre-drilled all screw holes to prevent potential cracking of the wood by the screws. I ensured the front board was perfectly perpendicular to the legs with the help of my pocket squares throughout the process. I then marked the spots for 2 pocket holes that will attach the sideboards to the front pair of legs, ensuring that these screws are not too close to the screws in the front board. I used clamps to help line everything up with a pocket square. I then drilled 2 pocket screw holes in both ends of the 2 sideboards connecting the bottom of the front pair of legs to the back pair of legs. As mentioned earlier, I only used scrap material as structural components which were not exposed or visible, and I used the nice solid poplar wood in visible areas. Time to trim the baseboards for the vanity legs. I used 2 different blades on my multi-tool to cut off the MDF and oak sections of the baseboard. It's finally time to attach the 2 pairs of legs together. I've turned both pairs of legs upside down in the exact spot where the vanity is to be built into. The floor is really level here.
When attaching this part of the skirt to that part of the skirt,
I gotta make sure that the legs are square with the floor and perfectly vertical. I started attaching the front pair of legs to the back pair while both pairs were upside down, using 2 large pocket squares and level bar throughout the process to help ensure both pairs of legs are perfectly parallel to each other and perfectly perpendicular to the floor. I did not use the walls as guides for this as they were not as level as the floor. I pre-drilled some holes in the 2 short side aprons, and I used a few 1¼ inch funnel head wood screws in each end of the side apron to connect the side apron to the narrower board of each L-shaped leg, making sure these screws are not too close to the pocket hole screws, which will connect the short apron to the wider board of each L-shaped leg. The top apron and all 4 legs are now connected. The next step is to build the shelf, starting with the bottom apron to which the shelf slats will be connected. I've cut some side apron boards to line up with the front apron from the side. This bottom side apron will provide additional stability for the vanity, in addition to providing structural support for the shelf. Similarly to the top apron, I've drilled pocket holes in each end of the bottom side aprons to connect the side apron to the front and back pairs of legs. I marked lines on the inside of the L-shaped legs at the same height from the floor on each leg to align the side apron with the lines when attaching the boards to the legs. In addition to using a pocket square to measure the height, I used my laser level to ensure the shelf ends up perfectly horizontal, parallel to the floor, as well as perfectly perpendicular to the legs. I clamped the side apron to the legs to keep it in place while drilling and screwing the boards together. The next step was to cut the bottom back apron and connect it to the back pair of legs. I used high-density 3/4 inch plywood as the back apron and attached it to the back pair of legs by sinking a few 1 1/4 inch funnel head screws through it and into the back wide sections of the 2 L-shaped legs. Now that all 4 legs are connected with both the top and bottom skirts, the next step was to work on the countertop. I used a 2x8 knotty pine board, which I cut into 2 30-inch long boards in order to create a 16 by 30-inch countertop. I ripped each of the knotty pine boards to remove both rounded edges and to create rectified edges on all 4 sides of each board. So far, I've trimmed off the rounded edges on these 2 knotty pine boards, and I've sanded them with 40 grit sandpaper to remove any roughness and splinters. I dry fit them over the base of the vanity to help me finalize the decision on keeping the dimensions of this countertop before connecting the 2 boards together using wood glue and pocket hole screws underneath the boards. One of the boards had a slight warping at one end, so I sanded its bulge to flatten it as much as possible. Now it's time to connect the 2 16 by 30 inch boards together. I drilled pocket holes in one of the 2 8-inch wide countertop boards in order to attach the 2 boards together side by side to make one 2 by 16 by 30 inch countertop. I used my Kreg pocket hole jig and specialized drill bit that came with the jig to drill 8 pocket holes in one of the boards at around 4 inches apart and 1 inch from each end of one of the boards. used the long screwdriver bit that came with the Craig pocket hole jig and 2.5-inch pocket hole screws from Craig designed for soft woods. First inserted the screws into the pocket holes. Then I applied and evenly spread a generous amount of wood glue along the edge of the same board. At this point, it would be useful to have longer clamps to hold the two boards together, but I did not have clamps long enough for that, so I improvised with my shorter clamps and clamped the pine boards to the table I borrowed from my kids for this part of the project. Clamping the boards to the work table helped keep the boards flush with each other while the glue was curing. I immediately screwed the 2.5-inch pocket hole screws all the way in and allowed the glue to cure. After the glue cured, I sanded the assembled countertop with 40 grit sandpaper to remove any unevenness, especially at the seam. I then followed by 80 and 120 grit sandpaper to create a smooth surface before staining. The next step is to prepare the vanity for staining. I used wood filler to fill in all visible gaps, especially at the seams between the two boards making up the L shape of each leg. I then sanded the base of the vanity with 80 followed by 120 grit sandpaper. I used my orbital hand sander connected to my shop vac. Although I would recommend using a square hand sander for this application, I recently obtained one myself for a current project and I feel the difference as it is much more suitable for this purpose. The next step was to attach the countertop to the vanity base. I was about to glue the countertop to the apron section of the vanity, but luckily I did some reading on woodworking tips before doing that, and I learned that a solid wood board as wide as my 16-inch countertop is likely to crack if it's attached in a way that does not allow it to move freely while expanding and contracting due to fluctuations in temperatures and humidity. To prevent cracking, I used metal Z or Z clips, which have one screw hole for the screw that would go into the countertop board, and the other end of the Z clip would go into a slot created at a specific distance in the apron, to which the countertop will be attached using 3 Z clips on each of the 2 long sides of the apron and 1 Z clip on each of the 2 short sides of the apron. I positioned the Z clips on the upside down countertop with the upside down vanity on top of it and marked the spots where I would create slots in the apron for the Z clips to be inserted into. The easiest way to create the slot is using a non-through cut with a table saw along the full length of the board. I did not know I was going to be using Z clips before I assembled the apron, so I used my angle grinder with an 8-inch thick grinding disc for the Z clip slots. Since I did not use glue between the countertop and the rest of the vanity, the Z-clips will be pulling the countertop towards the apron. They're made of thick metal with just the right flexibility to pull two perpendicular boards together in a tight bind, while still allowing the wood to expand and contract by moving horizontally widthwise across the slots in the apron. I purchased the Z-clips from Amazon, and the link can be found in the description of this video below. I first inserted the Z-clips into the slots I cut behind each of the 4 aprons, and then I used the short wood screws which came with the Z-clips to attach the clips to the underside of the countertop. Z-clips are not screwed into both boards, hence the purpose of the slot cutout in the apron. And this is what allows for wood movement with fluctuations in temperatures and humidity. I noticed a few sand marks in some areas, so I did a little more sanding with 180 grit sandpaper using my multi-tool. I also dry fitted the assembled vanity in the powder room and found that there was a slight wobble, so I trimmed one of the legs on the spot with my jigsaw. The next step was to work on the shelf, which will be made up of 10 shelf slats. I will attach these 2 1/4 inch wide slats to this front cross board using pocket hole screws underneath each slat so that the ends of the slats are sunken under the surface of this front board. In the back, the slats will be attached to the top of the back cross board, as this would add stability to the shelf. There will be a total of 10 slats with a 1/2 inch gap in between them. I cut a total of 10 2 1/4 inch wide slats from a 3/4 inch thick pine board, which had many wood knots, but I was able to hide them underneath most of the slats in order to better match the knotty pine to the poplar once all the boards are stained and finished. I used 80 and 120 grit sandpaper to sand the top and sides of each slat to remove splinters and sharp edges without rounding off the edges, as I was going for a rectified edge, especially at the ends of each slat, to ensure each slat meets the front apron with a clear, flush look. I drilled 2 pocket holes in one end of each of the 10 slats that will make up the shelf, as well as 2 pocket holes in both ends of the 2 side aprons, which were of the same dimensions as the 10 shelf slats. That was a total of 24 pocket holes for the 10 shelf slats and 2 side aprons, since I decided to only use pocket holes on one end of each slat, the end meeting the front apron only. The next step was to assemble the shelf. Now that all components are ready, it's time to attach the bottom 2 side aprons and connect the front pair of legs to the back pair at the bottom of the vanity. I previously installed the bottom front apron 3/4 of an inch higher than the bottom back apron, so that at the front of the vanity, the shelf slat ends meet the front apron in a way that hides the slat ends behind the apron, and so that the top side of the slats is flush with the top side of the apron. I also installed the 2 side aprons at the same height as the back apron, which is 3/4 of an inch lower than the front apron. 3/4 inch is the thickness of the shelf slats. This way, the back ends of the shelf slats rest on top of the back apron, while the front ends of the shelf slats are hidden behind the front apron. This results in a cleaner look, as well as minimizes the amount of dust collected in between the shelf slats. To ensure that the shelf slats are evenly spaced with a consistent gap in between, I connected several adjustable shims together using a rubber band to create a block of the exact width I needed to create parallel 1/2 inch gaps between the slats. I used one block of shims at the front of the slats and one at the back of the slats to ensure that the slats are as parallel to each other as possible. I used 1.5-inch 18-gauge brad nails in my brad nailer to fasten the back of each slat to the back apron. The 1/2-inch blocks came in handy again to keep the slats perfectly parallel to each other. I decided not to use pocket hole screws in the back like I did in the front, since nail holes would not be visible back there once the vanity is installed. I added wood filler to hide the nail holes and to smoothen some of the wood nuts. Once dry, I sanded off the excess wood filler using 180 grit sandpaper. The next step was to bulk the side countertop.
On top of the tine board, I attached smaller pieces of 1x4 poplar boards. I made it look like it's all one piece of wood.
Part of my vanity design was to add a side bulk to make the countertop look thick and bulky, as well as to eliminate a deep drop between the sink and the wall. Of course, there are many different ways to arrange this top mount sink on top of a vanity base, and I did try all variations and went with this look as I liked the idea of making the countertop look as chunky as the sink and make a statement. I made sure the wood grain runs in the same direction or parallel on all the boards that are part of the visible countertop, including the edge of the main countertop supporting the sink on top of it. And I used the same wood species as the main countertop. This helped ensure that the final countertop looks like one solid piece of wood instead of a whole bunch of boards put together. With the sink dry fit in place, I measured the width, length, and height of the bulk section to be built. I cross-cut the bulk section boards. This is a 16-inch deep countertop, and boards that wide are very costly. Similarly to what I did with the main countertop, I will attach two boards side by side to create a total 16-inch deep countertop bulk section, and use a bunch of small blocks on the inside of the bulk to keep it solid and sturdy, especially at the seam between the two top boards. I took measurements for the board going into the vertical section of the bulk. I cut a small board to fit that vertical area and dry fitted it with clamps to the countertop. I then miter cut the front edge of the top or horizontal board at 45 degrees, and I miter cut the top edge of the vertical front board at 45 degrees. This way, the two miter cuts will meet each other at 90 degrees at the top front corner to create a continuous book wrap along the top front edge of the bulk section of the countertop. I drilled pocket holes in one of the top two horizontal boards to connect it to the second top board. I also drilled pocket holes in the vertical board to connect it to the top horizontal board. I borrowed another furniture item from my kids to clamp the two boards to, after applying wood glue on both edges of the two boards meeting each other. And I screwed two pocket hole screws through the seam between the two boards. I added two pocket hole screws connecting the back vertical and horizontal sections together. To help keep the 90-degree joint intact and sturdy, I used a triangular scrap piece that resulted when I made the two miter cuts on these two boards, kinda like a 3D puzzle where I arranged the same three pieces from a flat 2D shape into a 3D shape. I then applied wood glue to the 45-degree miter cuts of the front vertical and horizontal boards and sank a few funnel head wood screws into the inside corner support piece to connect it to both boards, making up the book wrap. Several 3/4 inch thick scrap wood pieces and arranged them on the upside down bulk section to reinforce the hollow area underneath it. I used wood glue and brad nails to secure the supporting blocks within the hollow section of the bulk, especially at the inside corners and at the seam between the two horizontal boards. I added a couple of metal brackets to connect the bulk section to the countertop at the front of the vanity using my right angle or 90-degree offset ratcheting screwdriver for tight spaces. I added a scrap metal bracket to connect the back section to the main countertop. I had to leave a gap in the back in order to avoid a gap in the front between the bulk section and the previously installed countertop section. Now that the vanity base is fully assembled, it is ready for finishing. Time to sand the bulk section of the countertop. I sanded the new addition with 80, 120, and 180 grit sandpaper using my orbital sander. In the end, I sanded by hand all sharp corners and edges around the vanity, including the top edge of the countertop bulk section, exposed edges or outside corners of the legs, and the top edge of the shelf. I did not use my sander for this as I wanted to avoid rounding the edges too much while reducing scratching hazards, both for the wood and the hands and arms reaching for items stored on the shelf. In addition, if an orbital sander is used along the edges, it tends to polish the corners a little too much, resulting in closing off some of the wood grain. When sanding by hand, this opens up the wood grain and creates a more porous surface for stain to get absorbed into and for polyurethane to grab onto. Okay, now this beauty really is ready for finishing. I wore a solvent respirator, safety glasses and gloves, and used oil-based wood stain and polyurethane in the garage to finish the wood. I tested the stain in the back of the vanity and decided on a grayish semi-transparent stain. I thoroughly vacuumed and dry wiped all surfaces. I first preconditioned the wood to prepare it for staining. This ensures more even stain application and optimal stain absorption. To precondition the wood for staining, I rubbed a generous amount of mineral spirits into the wood grain using a lint-free cotton cloth that I cut out from an old t-shirt. I immediately followed by applying oil-based wood stain. I allowed the stain to absorb for up to 60 seconds and then wiped the excess stain with another clean lint-free cotton cloth. I did this during a cold Canadian winter in the garage, so stain and polyurethane took extra long to dry. The stain to thoroughly dry in the cold garage for over 24 hours. I applied a total of 7 coats of oil-based polyurethane, mostly because some of the finished vanity may be exposed to water being splashed outside the sink area. These 7 coats of oil-based poly are doing an amazing job protecting the wood from water splashes. I applied each coat of polyurethane using a cheap foam brush which I could just toss after each coat instead of having to soak and clean a costly natural bristle brush in mineral spirits after each use, which is actually the recommended way as per the oil-based polyurethane label, but the foam brush method actually worked really well without leaving brush strokes or any other uneven imperfections in the poly coats. So far, I've done 1 clear coat with Varathane Professional Premium Clear Finish. It's a matte oil-based polyurethane, and this is what it looks like when the first coat is dry. It actually lightened the shade of my stain a little, which I'm very happy with. I'm gonna give it a light sand by hand using a 320 grit soft sanding block. I'll thoroughly vacuum and wipe any poly dust in between each coat. 1 coat down, 6 to go.
what the vanity looks like after 6 coats. This time I'm gonna use the 000 steel wool.
I allowed each coat of poly to dry thoroughly before the next coat, and I lightly sanded after each of the first 6 coats of poly with a 320 grit soft sanding block. But before the 7th and final clear coat, I buffed the vanity with extra fine steel wool in place of 320 grit sandpaper. I vacuumed and wiped off all dust and applied the 7th and final clear coat. This project was actually completed a few years ago, and the vanity finish still looks the same despite kids splashing water next to the sink on a daily basis.
I did the 7 coats just now. I use the foam brush right here. It's looking pretty good. It's still wet. You see a few drips here.
As mentioned earlier, I kept an eye on the first minutes of the polyurethane drying on the vertical sections of the vanity. Since poly has very low viscosity and tends to form drips on vertical surfaces, I smoothed over any drips by brushing over them very lightly with a foam brush, dampened but not soaked with polyurethane. I did use a natural bristle brush for the first couple of clear coats, and overall I'm happier with the foam brush application as it results in no brush strokes. It wasn't practical to allow each fresh coat of poly to dry while each surface of the vanity was in a horizontal position, so I kept a close eye on it the first several minutes of drying to ensure I fix any drips resulting on vertical surfaces of the vanity. This side is unfinished as it will be up against the wall. As previously mentioned, the only reason I applied 7 clear coats was due to the potential of exposure to water. Otherwise, I would have stopped at around 4 clear coats, especially if the vanity had a non-wooden countertop. Once all 7 coats of poly were fully dry, I brought the vanity inside to prepare it for installation. I first created openings for the sink drain and 2 water lines. I drilled a few holes in the 2-inch thick countertop so that my jigsaw blade would fit through the holes to cut out some openings. Altered the angle of the wall ABS drain pipe to align it with the new sink drain position. Using my multi-tool, I cut off the fittings which were in the way of the new vanity. Using the sander attachment on the multi-tool, I sanded off rough edges around the cut lines to remove anything that would potentially attract any clogging hazards. attached new fittings to the ABS drain pipe going into the wall. I then dry fitted the vanity into position with the sink in place to help ensure proper alignment of the new ABS parts. I positioned the ABS parts in place to measure the length of the new ABS drain pipe. I cut the required length on the ABS pipe using my miter saw and sanded off the rough edges to ensure smooth water flow on the inside and a smooth surface for the seal with the ABS fittings. I had the wall drain plugged with a plastic bag upon removing the old sink to prevent exposing the house to any sewage gases. After dry fitting the new drain pipe and fittings, I cleaned all joints on the ABS parts and used ABS cement to bind the pipe parts and fittings together. Applied matte gray kitchen and bath caulking between the sink and the countertop, and white caulking between the white tile and the sink, as well as between the vanity legs and the white wall tile. I later switched out this matte black faucet for matte gold to match the other hardware in the powder room. If you'd like to see my videos on faucet installation and many other of my interior and exterior upgrades, please check out my YouTube channel, Create and Wonder.
Let's talk about how much this project cost me. Regarding the price of wood and the finishing materials alone, they cost me well under 100 Canadian dollars. I did pay around 300 Canadian dollars for the sink and even more for the Moen hardware, which is 3 pieces total. Everything I used is linked in the description below. Thank you for watching my video. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you can get updates on new videos that I post on my DIY home improvement projects.
I'd love to hear from you. Drop me a comment down below with any questions or suggestions. I'd be more than happy to provide more details such as dimensions, tools, and materials involved in this project and anything else you may be curious about.